Welcome back to the Center's speaker series for the winter term. It is a delight to welcome someone who needs no introduction to this group, the Deputy Director of the Center, Christian Breede. And today Christian is going to speak on the gap in artificial intelligence and defense policy, or the bleeding edge of war. Without any further ado.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nossel. It's a thrill to be here. This is something I've been looking forward to doing for quite some time. It's a result of probably about 18 months worth of research. I started this about 18 months ago, so a year and a half ago, looking at the impact of emerging technology in general, and more specifically artificial intelligence, and what that means for the way in which we think about and conduct wars and conflict. It's been a fascinating journey, and what I'm particularly excited about is today to share some of the initial research that came of that. It's by no means a finished product. It's hopefully something that I'll continue to be able to do for a while now. There's a number of products that I'm hoping that'll come out of this. One is a working paper that I'm happy to circulate. I printed off a couple copies. If anyone's interested in taking one, please feel free, and my email address is on there, and I'd be happy to get some feedback, constructive or otherwise. So what I want to talk about today is as Dr. Nossel said, the bleeding edge of war and this gap that I think exists between the technology and the policy. And it's nothing new in terms of that idea, but what I think is interesting is with this particular crop of artificial intelligence, is Canada's in a really unique position, and we might be risking losing that position, is effectively what I want to get at. So before we get too much farther down the road on this, I need to define a few terms, and we'll do that sort of throughout this talk. The first one I want to define is bleeding edge. Some of you may have heard the term before. It's not my own. It's not one I came up with, but it is definitely a riff on cutting edge. And so if we accept the idea that cutting edge is new technology that's right at that sort of proverbial edge of advancement, it's new, it's exciting, it does things that we didn't think were possible, bleeding edge is one step even further. It's so new, it's so exciting, that not only does it do new things, but it does new things that might actually be a detriment to us. It benefits us, and it hurts us. And not only is it going to hurt us, but we kind of know it will, and we accept that because the benefits we think might one day outweigh the costs that we're incurring right now. So when we talk about technology at the bleeding edge, we're talking at that technology that is right there, that has got negative implications as well as positive implications, but we're going to accept that. We might not even know what some of those negatives are because we think the promise is so much greater. And that's really where we're at with this current crop of emerging technology, and in particular, artificial intelligence. And I think we're at that point where we're seeing a fundamental shift in the way in which we organize, the way in which we interact, the way in which we do anything. And of course, I'm focusing on war and conflict, but really this applies across the board. And again, you don't have to listen to the news too much before you get that sense yourself. And so if we accept that the Industrial Revolution was one of those, was sort of the first machine age, I'm going to borrow from Roger McAfee and Eric, I'm not even going to try his last name, but that last name, the co-author, of this idea of the second machine age, which is driven effectively by information technology, whether it's computers, whether it's the datafication of ourselves. All of that rolled in together is creating this thing that McAfee and his colleague call the second machine age. And so if we accept that, we see that Canada, interestingly enough, was actually in a first mover position. In 2017, early on, we introduced what we called the Pan-Canadian Artificial Intelligence Strategy, which was a document that did a couple of things. One, it invested a lot of money, $125 million, into this thing that we call AI. And it did that by investing in 3 research centers across Canada, one in Montreal, one in Alberta, in Edmonton, and one in Toronto. And basically handed that all over to this umbrella organization called the Canadian, I can't remember the name of it's the CFAR, thank you, right, the CFAR. And they became sort of the clearinghouse for all these things. And this is what sort of came of the PCAIS back in 2017. Canada was the first country in the world to do something like that. So and actually a pretty cool first mover. And you can see in the grayed out area, we see some other countries that were very close on the heels, Singapore, and a few other countries as well. We see Finland, Japan. So very quickly, although a first mover, we were very quickly, other countries were catching up. And so it's important to understand that we got out the gate fast, but I think we're at a point where we're maybe ceding some of that ground. And so what I mean by that is, the question effectively is, while Canada appears to be well positioned in general to leverage emerging technology, in particular artificial intelligence, the research thus far is really silent on defense and security issues. And so I want to show where that is, where I'm making that, why the foundation for that claim, and what I think the problem is, and where we can go forward. And so really, these are the two key documents that come out. So the government had an Artificial Intelligence Readiness Index. This is through the Oxford Insights. So this is a think tank. But this is the document that came out of CFAR and was sort of the first result of that pan-Canadian artificial intelligence strategy. And both are silent on defense issues, which I think is really interesting. So there's two questions that come out. One, I want to get at this idea of readiness. What does it mean to be ready to accept artificial intelligence from a defense policy perspective? And two, I want to compare it against other countries. How do we stack up? Have we ceded that first mover position? Back in 2017, when we were the first out the gate to talk about artificial intelligence in a public policy way. Has that translated to our defense policy? And I argue it really hasn't. I think we're taking some risk. So we've got to define another term. And that's artificial intelligence. It's one of those words that you hear a lot about. Everybody kind of knows what it is, but when you try to define it, you get all sorts of competing definitions. And so for me, I see there's sort of two basic categories of definitions. One is theoretical, and one is empirical. And so for the theoretical definition, I'm going to lean on Russell and Norvig. They wrote the book, quite literally, on artificial intelligence called Artificial Intelligence: A Modern Approach. It is literally a textbook on AI. It's been through multiple revisions. 2016 is the latest version. And this is considered the gold standard for understanding from zero to hero, if you will, how AI works. And this is their definition, which is interesting. And this is one of four possible definitions. This is the one they lean on. It's their idea of a rational agent or a rational actor. And so for Russell and Norvig, artificial intelligence, or this idea of recreating intelligence, can be broken into two categories of either trying to recreate how we think as human beings or how we act as human beings. And those lead to different forms of technology. If we're trying to think about or look at how we think as human beings, we're talking about neural nets. If we're looking at how we act as human beings, we're talking about things like machine learning and whatnot. And Russell and Norvig really center in on this idea of we're not looking at how we think, but we're looking at how we act, and we're trying to do so rationally, not as humans, with that sort of not irrational, but sort of unexplainable decision-making sometimes. So they're really looking at this rational agent idea of artificial intelligence, which is helpful, but to be honest, I think it's a bit excessively broad. It doesn't really get at the nugget of what's causing all the, frankly, social anxiety we're dealing with today and why this is something that's worth looking at from a defense policy perspective. This definition can apply equally well to a calculator that we all had growing up as kids, or to the proverbial HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? Whether we're talking narrow artificial intelligence or general artificial intelligence. Two very, very different things, but both kind of feeding into this idea of a rational agent. And so we need to be a bit more precise. And so here I look at the work of Jack Clark in OpenAI, and he's got a really, really compelling definition that's a little bit more empirically grounded in terms of what artificial intelligence really is. And so I'll reconstruct that for you here. It starts with algorithms. And algorithms have been around for millennia. This one is a Babylonian tablet that's arguably the first algorithm ever recorded. It has also the component of compute. So we got the Turing machine from post-World War II, where we really started to get into that in a mechanical, meaningful way. And the third element is us. It's our data. And what we're finding right now, since 2001, when that datafication of human beings has really taken off, we're finding we're almost in a bit of a perfect storm, if you will, where we're seeing the confluence of compute, algorithm, and data into what we call AI now. Now, AI has been around for a long time as well. We go back to here's where it was first meaningfully discussed. In fact, the term was coined artificial intelligence in the early 50s. What gets us to this point is that we've got that perfect storm where we see the computing power, thanks to Moore's law, is at the point where we can actually meaningfully correlate and calculate probabilities and refine those probabilities through our Bayesian algorithms to the point where we can actually do something interesting with sufficiently large amounts of data that's not going to take years to process. And we're generating sufficiently large amounts of data so those correlations actually have significance. They actually have meaning. The algorithms, interestingly enough, haven't actually changed all that much. That's been the consistent piece. That's been the part that we've had for a long time. We've just never had the data, and we've never had the computing power until the last decade or so to really get something out of that. It's this confluence that took us out of what's been known as the artificial intelligence winter of the 1970s and 1980s, where research was really, really excited. This period has been here before. We've been in this position before where there's been a lot of hype over artificial intelligence. And it died out because they ran into the problem of computing and data. We've solved that a little bit, and we're now at that next bound of hype in terms of what AI can offer. But again, it's still fairly limited in terms of it's based on algorithms that have been around for centuries, if not millennia. But this is where we see AI now. So this is a more empirical definition. Like I said, this is from Jack Clark's work with OpenAI. So in terms of some of the literature I leaned on, I of course looked at the literature that looked at war and technology and how technology has influenced war and vice versa. But I also want to look at some questions of innovation and look at how we think about innovation and how that affects how ready a military, in this case, will be to adopt a new technology. Because one of the things that came out of all of this work was that the key theme was that it's not about the technology itself. Whether we're talking swords, stirrups, gunpowder, nuclear weapons, those are kind of the technical sideshows to the fundamental question, which is how well is an organization set up to adapt or adopt this new, innovative, disruptive, scary, exciting, promising, damaging technology. It's not about the technology. It's about our ability to accept that new technology and whether we adapt to it or adopt it. And so I found the work of Michael Horowitz and his Diffusion of Military Power really, really interesting for that. And he talks about a number of factors that feed in that I stole basically from his work and built to build this measure of where Canada sits and compare it to a few other countries. So the age of the organization, how much money it spends on research and development, its critical task focus, and I'll talk more about that a little later, and its strategic orientation all feed into how well an organization, in this case the military, but this applies to any organization, is at leveraging a new piece of technology. The Government Artificial Intelligence Readiness Index, which comes out, they've got this is their third run, I believe it is, now that comes out through Oxford Insights and the Government of Canada, does a really good job of explaining how ready a government is, but again, like I said before, is silent on defense, but they do have some interesting pieces that apply to the question of defense. Notably, the presence or absence of AI policy at the national level, the public service orientation towards data management, data analysis, and artificial intelligence, and if there's an AI defense policy, because I did want to capture if that piece has been there. Some countries do have this in place. And a lethal autonomous weapon system policy as well, which again, some countries have. So those are the variables that I started to look at that I drew from, in this case, from the Government Artificial Intelligence Readiness Index from 2019 to feed into my own index that I was going to call the Defense Artificial Intelligence Index, or DARI, which is a bit of an unexciting acronym, but it works. And so in terms of the technology, there's another piece that's missing, which is the technology ecosystem in which these policies exist. And so I wanted to look at internet penetration rates of the country, the startups in terms of technology, like tech company startups, and the Internet of Things installed base. And so these three variables are also things that I capture to try to pull together and aggregate what I think would be an accurate measure based on the work of Horowitz, based on the literature I've consulted, that would give a pretty good estimation for how ready a country is, and in particular a military is, to really leverage and exploit artificial intelligence in a positive and constructive way. And so we pull those together and we get the Defense AI Readiness Index. So I looked at a number of countries, 10 in total. And my country selection was fairly straightforward in that I wanted to look at the Allies, the Anglosphere, and I wanted to look at the BRICS, so Brazil, Russia, India, China. So our main competitors. And I threw in Israel. Israel is a case that I wanted to throw in because they've got a history of innovation, driven largely by the military, and they've got some really, I hate to use this term, but they do generally punch above their weight in terms of innovation and adoption of new technologies and things like that. So I wanted to include them as a bit of a marker. And so those were the cases for comparison. And so taking these three baskets together, the operationalized adoption capacity theory from Michael Horowitz, the details and the ecosystem of emerging technology in each country, and the government and public services component of the Governance AI Readiness Index, pulled those three elements together, normalized the variables, averaged them out, just a simple equal weighted average. Didn't think any one of these particular elements were any greater or lesser value or weight or importance, so they all received equal weighting, and did it across all 10 countries. And here are the results. So no surprise, the US came out on top at 0.7, Israel in second, China with 0.63 in third place. That's the top three. Bottom three, working from the 8th, 9th, and 10th place, so Brazil, India, and New Zealand. And I need to put an asterisk beside New Zealand. New Zealand gets a bit of an unfair shake here, given the size of the country and whatnot. It's probably unfair to say that they're at the bottom of my 10-country data set. So there's probably some more work that needs to be done there in terms of refining this, but it's interesting nonetheless. So you're probably all wondering where Canada sits. You can see it's probably not top three, not bottom three, but where do we sit? Typically Canadian, right in the middle, 6th place. So we were a first mover in 2017 in terms of first at the gate with a government-wide national policy on artificial intelligence, and we're, according to my estimates and what the research here, we've ceded some of that ground. Here's what it looks like in detail. So what this is the lines between the points are a bit misleading, so really just focus in on the vertices as opposed to the edges themselves, because there is no data in between each of these two nodes, but it does make for an interesting picture nonetheless. And so here are the 10 countries in the data set showing the relative value of each of the three elements. So green is technology, that's the technology ecosystem. Red is the organization, so that's the organizational capacity to adopt a new technology, that's Horowitz. And then the blue is the policy, so that's the GARI, the Government's Artificial Intelligence Readiness Index that I used. And so we can see a couple interesting trends, and I'll highlight those for you here. In terms of the leaders across each of the three categories, we see the United States is a leader in terms of organizational capacity. It's got the highest rating of all 10 countries in terms of organizational capacity. We see, it's got the high in terms of technology ecosystem. So that's like no surprise, right? The home of Apple, Google, Amazon, they're the leader in terms of technological ecosystem. In terms of organizational capacity, this is the Horowitz piece. The leader here is Brazil, which is really interesting. It's one that I found really surprising and is definitely worthy of further digging and further research to see what's going on in Brazil that's different from the other countries. And in terms of the policy leader, it's Israel, which isn't quite as surprising given the rationale for including it in the first place. In terms of laggards, organizational capacity is New Zealand, which again I think probably merits a bit further inquiry. Brazil again is the policy laggard in this case is, Brazil we said. The organizational laggard is New Zealand, and then the technological laggard is Israel, which I find interesting as well. A little counterintuitive. So again, I have to take another deeper look, and again, it might be a question of size and scale, but again, recalling that this talks about Internet of Things installed base, internet penetration, and number of tech startups. So there might be, it's fairly clear where that data comes from, but we can see here the leaders and laggards in both cases across all three elements. Something else that's worth looking at here is the consistency across the three. And so I wanted to see, are there countries that are sort of generally good at all three? Because we see, of course, Israel has a fairly high spread, and in this case, it was the United Kingdom and Russia came out as being, maybe not the leader or laggard, but certainly consistent across all three. There was a fairly tight average for those two countries, and then of course Israel had the least consistent, but that's not a surprise given that it's both a leader and a laggard within the data set. So what I want to talk about too is just kind of start to do some analysis of all of this, right? So I showed you some of the data, some of the description. I want to get into some analysis, and for that I'm going to lean on the classic law of diffusion of technology. And I think some of you have probably seen this before, but we think of just a normal distribution, which is frequently referred to as the adoption rate of technology. I think everyone has seen this before. So you've got your innovators here, the 2.5%. These are the folks that love being on the bleeding edge. They want something new just because it's new. Not because it does anything good for them or that it's going to promise them something better, cheaper, more efficient, but it's new. These are the folks that are going to line up for the iPhone for 6 hours before it comes out, just because they want to be the first people with the iPhone. They could come back a week later and pick it up right away, but no, they want it when it comes out. You've got your early adopters, which are a little bit more pragmatically oriented, but still want that new thing before it's maybe fully tested. And you've got your early majority. And from a business perspective, getting from here to here is the trick. That's some scholars have called it the chasm. But if you can translate your market share from the early adopter to the early majority. If you can convince the early adopter to early majority shift, if you can convince those that sit in that early majority to adopt your new piece of technology, you're cooking. You now have real market share. Again, this isn't new revelatory work. This is kind of MBA 101 kind of stuff. What we throw on top of this, and this is stuff I've drawn from Max Michaud-Shields and his work on soldier enhancement that I've cited elsewhere a lot, because he was sort of the first one to show me this application to technology, is we start looking at things like average cost curves. In one case, which helps you get across the chasm, you can see why, right? This is the long run average cost curve. We see that early adopters and innovators tend to pay a premium for that new technology. And as you wait, the price goes down, which is often what is the incentive that the early adopters need to start purchasing things. And then as the price dips, you get the late majority, and then the laggards, they come late to the game. They get to pay a premium because things after a while start to get more expensive to make as the technology gets older. So that's basic economics. But we can overlay the two in sort of a crude way to start to see some sort of critical points along these curves. And the next one we're going to throw up is the Gartner hype cycle. And again, we see here the innovators and the early adopters are feeding into that hype. This is what they call the pit of despair, where suddenly that new technology just fails to meet the expectations. And then it gets retooled, a software patch gets out, and now everybody loves it again. And then it plateaus because it's done what it can do. It doesn't get you any farther. So if we throw those three curves together, we can start to see some critical points that emerge. And so what's interesting is if we look at this, we can start to see that perhaps in that red area, we see whatever capability benefit you get from some new piece of technology is neutralized if you adopt here or here. Here, it's too expensive, and here you kind of miss the boat. The green zones here the yellow zones here are the frustrated capability. This is where you get something new, it kind of works, but it's such a pain in the ass to make work that it's just not worth it. I'm thinking here, this is my experience with our old land forces command and control and information systems that I used to use in the military. It was cool, you could see the promise, but it just never really worked. So this is frustrated capability. It gives you a benefit when it works, if you can get it to work, if you can get past the extremely steep learning curve, but it's not really there yet. The sweet spot is right there, where you fully optimize that capability. It's cheap enough, but the effect is still early enough that you're getting the benefit. You're still getting some of that first mover advantage, but without the cost and without the frustration that comes with learning and you've already gotten past that sort of proverbial pit of despair. So based on where the countries sit, well, first off, so we call this the adoption space. If you're in here, you're adopting a technology. If you're in there, you're adapting to it. So I think we can kind of see where we want to be. We don't want to adapt to something. We want to adopt it. We want to get the benefit of it. And so based on the analysis I did and looking at where the countries sit, if you're in the top three, you're adopting technology. You're adopting AI. I think we're sitting more in the adaptation piece. I think we've really kind of ceded a bit of ground. So what? So what do we do about it? If we accept this, there's a couple things we can do. One, how we're organized matters as much as the technology. So our organizations have to think about how and what we're trying to do and how we can achieve innovation at every level. What does innovation look like? For me, this gets me thinking about those terms we hear tossed around all the time in organizations: agility. Companies want to be agile. Organizations want to be agile. The Army wants to be agile. I always ask, what does that mean? What do you mean by agile? Are we talking a flattened hierarchy? Are we talking networking? Are we talking reducing the bureaucracies? What does that mean? What does it mean to be agile? And this point gets at that question. We need to think about what it actually means to be agile and start unpacking that. So how we are organized really, really matters. We can have the shiniest, newest piece of technology out there. If we're not organized appropriately to take it on, it's not going to get optimized. And again, Horowitz's book does a fantastic job of running through a series of technologies, whether it's the aircraft carrier, the machine gun, and explains exactly why certain countries adopted the aircraft carrier and have a success with it, and other countries haven't even bothered. Canada, I would assess, is weak in the organizational piece. We don't have that component as strongly as other countries do. We're reasonably strong on policy, and we're kind of middling in technology. we've got a fantastic technological ecosystem that I think is being under-optimized, underutilized. And there's a fantastic opportunity for Canada to become a world leader in this stuff. In fact, many of our scholars, many of our companies are in fact world leaders. I think of Yoshi Abengo over at Mila, one of the 3 institutes that got invested in by the PKAIS. He's a world leader in artificial intelligence research at the cutting edge of what's being done right now in AI. And he works in a Canadian institution. And we need to cherish that and reinforce that. But we're at risk, as you can see, we risk adapting rather than adopting this new technology. And so how we address those first 4 points will lead directly to which way we go on the 5th point. And so those are the key takeaways so far from the research that I've been working on over the last few months. And if you have any questions, reach me here. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm happy to take questions from the floor.
You do the question.
All right, thanks, Kim. Yeah?
So I'm Media Greetings from the Warfare Center. Yeshua Benjo and most of that crew, all classes anti-military.
Yeah.
How do you cross that bridge?
So that is probably the single biggest reason. This is some conversations I've had offline and things like that, where there are huge gaps between what's being done in the private sector through guys like Yoshi Abengo and the military's own efforts at doing just this. Absolutely. So I think back to the CEO of Microsoft was asked this very same question, because famously all the coders in Google had a bit of a palace coup and said, we're not going to work on Project Maven for the Department of Defense anymore, which was the AI system that the DoD had contracted Google to do. And why do it yourself when you get the best company in the world to do it for you? They've got the access to the best data sets, the most expansive data sets. They're going to provide the best product, and yet their coders wanted nothing to do with the military. And so it really comes down to a question of what your company stands for in terms of values, and sort of trying to almost sell it to the private sector, saying, this isn't about the military, this is about our country and the security of our country and how we're going to use it. The analogies for technology are pretty deep. Does the Ford automaker company feel responsible for the use of its equipment during the Second World War or its misuse? It kind of comes down to those kind of questions that CEOs have to ask themselves and the employees have to ask themselves too. But it's absolutely a barrier. And it's one of the reasons why we need to cultivate talent more broadly. Cultivate talent in-house, cultivate talent broadly, and cultivate talent in a way that maybe some will feel that way, and they always do. But hopefully some will feel that they're willing to support military efforts as well. And it's incumbent on decision makers and policymakers in the military to build trust and say, listen, this is something we're going to use and not misuse, not abuse this new technology. So
I think maybe up something there, because those same people who wouldn't work on Project Maven were happy to work for the Chinese government.
Right. Yeah, and then that's going to lead right into their social credit system, which has probably even bigger issues, for sure. Yeah, Andrew.
I may have missed it, so I apologize. So why did India perform so badly in the quantitative?
So it has to do with the variables that fed into it. I have to look at the spreadsheet and look at the individual data points, but it would have to do, I can bring the slide up, we can take a look at what they're disaggregated.
I would have assumed a correlation between population size and that
Yeah.
potential scoring.
So we can see here, India is fairly weak in terms of the technological ecosystem and the organizational capacity, but it's fairly decent in policy. So again, I'd have to look a little deeper in terms of where what those documents are actually saying. This is really an estimate, but that's a good sort of counterintuitive observation that we see India as a technological upstart. That you'd think that this point here, the green would be a little higher, but it could also be that maybe it's a question of how much of this is homegrown, how much of it is multinationals that are based in other countries that are set up a subsidiary in India. I'm not. Those are just sort of answers off the top of my head that I could think of, but. Definitely it's worth diving deeper, and this is really a surface level skim, but at least it reveals those points, right, that we could look at. Yeah, Andrew, or Sam.
So last slide you had Canada does really well when it comes to policy, but is weak on the technology and organizational side. But two solutions I've seen trying to sell people in the military AI and diffusion solutions. Was there a need for more education to make with the policy, like say the organizational weaknesses and these solutions to technological weaknesses was relying on commercial off-the-shelf stuff or even open source stuff? are we ready to do either of those things? Mainstream, mainstream education from the CF about these kind of technologies, or adopt commercial off-the-shelf technologies that are just ready to go?
I can't speak on what we're doing on a sort of individual training perspective. There's a few folks in the room that probably could speak to it better than I could. But I think, yeah, I think the more, and it's not that we need to teach everyone how to code. In fact, that's exactly what we don't want. What we want, though, is people to be sensitive to what this stuff can do, what it can't do, and how it works at not necessarily the software level, but at the sort of conceptual level. Right? So understanding that's why I love that definition of artificial intelligence that Jack Clark offers, is that you see very clearly from that AI, this scary thing that everyone associates with Skynet and drones, is rooted in us. It doesn't do anything unless we use it. It becomes useless unless we use it. It's relying on our data. Every little thing we do on a smartphone, on a TV, on a computer, enables that AI to make better decisions in the future. But if we all stopped using it, Google Maps would stop working, your smart TV wouldn't give you those recommendations anymore, and your smart TV would also cost 4 times the price. And this is one of the sort of side avenues of research and almost advocacy that I've sort of stumbled upon, is this idea of how we've commodified our data has been reversed. We kind of had a fast one pulled on us, which was that our data is of immense value, and we don't realize it. And there's a reason why, like I said, your smart TV is only $500. Samsung makes a loss on the sale of those products because they value the data that you're going to generate over the 5 years that you're going to have that TV much more than they do the hardware that you just put on your wall. Joel?
What's the strategic or security advantage to Canada of trying to not fall behind on this? Will we be more secure? And given that most of the countries we're supposedly competing with are allies, and we may be able to buy the technology, wouldn't it be better to put any millions of dollars, let's say, into transportation, let's say into climate? That is, what's the advantage in terms of security of being on the leading edge and supporting your researchers to be on the leading edge, given that the technology may be widely available, and if your allies really want you to have it, they'll give it to you?
So I think it kind of answered your own question in a lot of ways, because it's if the allies want to share it. If they want us to have it, then great, but if they suddenly decide no, then we're in a bit of a problem. The other thing, of course, is I started thinking about, again, about long-run average costs. In the grand scheme of things that we could spend on defense and security, this is pretty cheap, right? We're talking about investing in creating expertise, creating competency, creating literacy or numeracy in this kind of technology. That's much cheaper than buying an aircraft carrier or a fleet of F-35s. And so it's something that we can do, and that's actually achievable in terms of creating a bit of autonomy in terms of our security posture. The other piece, in terms of just why this matters just in general, is, again, unlike most military technologies, and there's a bit of, I don't want to be too extreme on this, technology has affected all aspects of conflict, but most advances in technology have really been on that kinetic front, the kinetic edge, that idea of how to kill people more effectively, more efficiently, in larger numbers with less effort. That's where most of the technology has been focused. AI is not focused there. AI is focused about 2 steps back in the decision-making cycle, and making that decision-making faster and more accurate so that you kill the right people at the right time in the right place. And so if we can do that better, then that's a clear strategic advantage. And if our competitors do that better than we do, then we're at a clear strategic disadvantage. And so it is an area I think that is worthy of investment for that very reason. Yeah, and I go into a lot more detail of that in the paper, that sort of make that argument of where AI sits in terms of the history of military innovation and technology and technological advances, and that it's in many ways very, very different than what we're used to seeing. Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, what do you think the possible implications of adopting the technology and moving into the defense realm are for things like arms race stability and crisis stability in international politics?
Yeah, so there'll be a huge temptation. I hope not by us and our friends, but certainly there will be that temptation to let the machines do the thinking for us. And that gets really scary because we start to see decisions that would be taking hours be done in milliseconds, and it's that idea of machine speed. This is a bit of an analogy that you can use to sort of see what I'm talking about, Elon Musk in his infamous interview with, what was the guy's name? You guys can help me out. I can't remember the guy's name. Joe Rogan, right? Where he smoked a joint and got high and had some whiskey, and then the shareholders got all up in arms. He had a really interesting little description of his Tesla Model S and how it works and why, because Joe Rogan asked him, hey, it must be fun to take that thing out for a spin, get it into some skids and stuff, and he's like, hey, you can't. And Joe Rogan says, I beg your pardon, what do you mean you can't put your Tesla into a skid? He's like, no, it won't let you. He said, what do you mean it won't let me? Like, I just do it. You know, all these cars have driver assist technologies, and I can put them into skids, no problem. He's like, no, the Tesla won't do it. And he says, why? Well, think about what powers it. It's not an internal combustion engine. It's 4 electric motors, 1 on each wheel. And that electric motor, there's a reason why dentists use those kind of motors as opposed to an internal combustion engine. It's the idea of granularity and refinement of control. An internal combustion engine is a blunt instrument to power something. And so when you start to lose control and the wheels start to slip and you're losing power and it's applying the wrong power, that's how you get into a skid. The Model S, it's working at machine speed. Those electric motors can sense the wheels losing grip, losing traction well before you'll ever feel it, and they'll adjust. And so the Model S won't go into a skid, because it's not even that it's a software. It's not even the software that says, this is anti-skid software. It's just the way the vehicle works, which is really, really cool. That same thing applies when we start talking about deterrence and how we use these kind of technologies. It works so much faster than we can possibly manage if we allow it to. And so we really need to make sure that you've heard the term human on the loop. It's that piece that's really, really critical. And it's baked into a lot of our thinking in Canada and in the West writ large. But again, I don't know if it's guaranteed that our competitors are thinking that way, and definitely can't guarantee that non-state actors are going to be thinking that way.
Just to follow on that, I think there would be also a possible danger in the sense that if you have an artificial intelligence capability that your adversary can't get, I'm thinking about the offset to the offset and the possibility of EMP, for instance, becoming a counter to artificial intelligence or nuclear weapons. So it may actually have the second and third order effects that are somewhat dangerous or destabilizing.
Yeah, for sure. And this is, again, why we don't all want to be coders in the military. We want to make sure some of those fundamental skills are retained as well. I just think back to my old time as a company 2IC in an infantry battalion. We had these fancy computers that would have a digital moving map on them and plot all our movement that sometimes worked, but more often than not didn't. I still insisted on putting up a map with little pins to track the battle. Super low tech, but it never failed. And the worst thing that happened is that one of those pins would fall out of the map. And I'd just get on the radio real quick and get a lock stat on that one unit, and I'd be good to go. Whereas if the computer crashes, not only do I lose positional awareness, but I can't even talk to anybody anymore. So yeah, there's a huge risk of becoming overly committed to this kind of technology and forgetting some of the basics that allowed us to get to this point. So again, it means the idea of generalists. We need more generalists, and this is why I love studying politics, because we do that in politics. We focus on cultivating generalists, which I think is fantastic. Yeah.
Just in terms of methods, I believe one of the limitations of the government Readiness Index was it being more of a quantitative base, and there were missing data points in some cases. So do you think that might also explain why you have that discrepancy between maybe using
for sure.
Yeah, and I'm using their same technique, right? So I'm replicating those same errors because my coding regimen for laws policy, for example, was 3 options: yes, no, and in progress, right? So there really wasn't it wasn't a continuous variable by any means. It was totally a polycotomous variable in every case. It lends itself to easy quantification, but yeah, I'm losing a lot of information for sure.
So no way of overcoming it?
There is, but it would take a lot longer, maybe a sabbatical or some research money. No other questions? Right on.
What implications does this have for the Canadian Armed Forces in the immediate term? We've seen just in the last week or so some criticisms of CAF capital costing over the next 10, 15 years. having left out the North Warning System or the replacement of it. Do you see anything similar in the context of other applications of AI for the CAF as an organization, not just Canada as an organization?
So the big one, and again, this kind of goes back to what it is that AI does in terms of where it sits on how it changes war and conflict, is it's on the decision support side. So rolling artificial intelligence out in a meaningful way in the military in Canada would allow us to not only hopefully capture better data, but actually do something valuable with that data. One of the biggest things that's happening right now, and I'm sure those of you in uniform will agree, is you're getting overwhelmed with the amount of information that's out there. In fact, I think it was about 15 years ago we introduced, and maybe I got it a bit off, but it's been a recent innovation in the staff system, is we have information management officers in headquarters, which their sole function is to try to keep track of all the info and make sure it gets to the right people. This is where this kind of technology can really help. It can help be the clearinghouse to make sure the right information gets to the right people. And then, of course, we have these millions and millions of data points. We now can make really interesting correlations and start updating our probabilities. And just a little bit of technical piece, one of the major components of artificial intelligence is machine learning. And it's rooted, like I said before, in an old algorithm, Bayes' theorem. That's how your spam filter works, it's how your recommendation engine works. And all it does is it takes a probability that's arbitrarily derived or given through experience or something, and then makes an observation, and then modifies the probability and refines it, makes it tighter, makes it faster, makes it smarter, makes it more accurate. And that was a really clumsy way to make probability better, make a more accurate probabilistic prediction. What's happened, like I said before, with computing power increasing exponentially, with our increasing amounts of data out there, is we can now do that really cumbersome formula, really cumbersome calculation over and over and over again in a blink of an eye. And now we're getting these super precise probabilities and predictions that are eerily accurate, but simply based on large amounts of data that we're crunching really, really fast. It's nothing new, it's nothing incredibly innovative, it's just we've got the power now to do it. And so being able to roll that out into a headquarters, even at a battalion or battle group level, I think would have a huge force multiplier advantage and combat advantage.